Everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel, Voice of Astrology. My name is Kiris. Thank you so much for being here. Let's have a chat today about what's called the Lunar Return in astrology. And also I brought in some demonstration charts for Marilyn Monroe. This year marks the 60th anniversary of her passing, and I think you may find them quite fascinating. Now, the Lunar Return. The lunar return is every month when the moon goes back to the same degree and minute of where it is in your birth chart. This is called the lunar return, and it is one of the most effective techniques of prediction in astrology. Most people have heard about the solar return, when the sun at the time of your birthday goes back to the exact degree and minute of where it is in your birth chart. People say when the sun goes back to the same place of where it is in your birth chart. That is not correct. Everything is always in motion. Everything is moving, including the sun. If the sun stood still, the gravitational pull of the sun would pull the planets and smash into the sun. So to say that the sun is standing still and that your solar return is when the sun goes back to the same place isn't really accurate. It's accurate in astrology to say that when your solar return, which can be the day before, the day of, or the day after your birthday, when the transiting sun goes back to the same degree and minute of where it is in your birth chart, that's the solar return. And the same thing applies every month when the lunar return goes back to the degree and minute of where it is in your birth chart. In ancient astrology, the original astrology was based on the moon. It was based on the night sky. Stargazers, astrologers, and farmers, we see things at night, the stars, the planets, the heavens. So doesn't it make sense that astrology would be based on the moon? That's when we see everything. Now, prediction in astrology is the heart and soul. It's the root of astrology. When people lived for thousands of years close to nature, and they looked to the night sky and wrote down and kept records for centuries, they go back 5,000 years and more, of the cycles that endlessly repeat and repeat and repeat as they do today. It's really not that difficult to predict in astrology if you know what you're doing. And the lunar return, which you would want to know this, have your astrologer look up your lunar return for you, because prediction and the lunar return chart month to month is one of the most effective tools of prediction in astrology. Now, I wanted to bring in Marilyn Monroe's chart because there are some really fascinating things astrologically in these charts. And it is the 60th anniversary of her passing, which we will look at in a moment. Now, in her birth chart, Marilyn was born June 1st, 1926 in Los Angeles at 9:30 a.m. In her natal chart, she has Leo rising at 13 degrees. The Leo rising is ruled by the sun. Her sun at the time of her birth was up in the 10th house of visibility, fame, fortune. It's a daytime chart. Her moon was at 19 degrees Aquarius, 6 minutes in the 7th house of marriage and open enemies. What are called the terminal houses in astrology? The 4th, the 8th, and the 12th. Terminal meaning endings. Now, the 12th house is the house of hidden enemies. The mystery, it's right there. It's hiding in plain sight and you don't see it. The 8th house is death. 4th house is endings. But just to begin with, knowing that her moon, the lunar return, was at 19 degrees, 6 minutes Aquarius, ruled by Saturn. She has Jupiter and the moon, both in Aquarius at the time of her birth in the 7th house. And when someone passes on, their chart lives on after them. The chart is a living soul. And so the chart and transits to the chart, lunar returns to the chart. They keep going after the physical body, after the person has passed. So this is what we know in the birth chart. Now let's go over to, so the birth chart, what I really wanted to point out is the moon at 19 degrees, 6 minutes in the sign of Aquarius in the 7th house. Now, this is her, Marilyn Monroe's, lunar return chart, the month of her death, of her passing. And so this is the predictive tool, the lunar return for the month leading up to the day, the moment of her passing. Now, in the lunar return chart, that applies to August 5th, 1962. What's happening in this chart is that to begin with, and there has been so much mystery, so much speculation about what really happened. So let's take a look. Now, for this lunar return leading up to August 5th, she has the moon in the 12th house of hidden enemies. So the 12th house is secrets. It's what's going on behind the scenes. It's what I call hiding in plain sight. It's a blind spot. It's like it's right there and you just don't see it. And this is her lunar return for the lead up to August 5th. She has Pisces rising for her lunar return chart with Jupiter retrograde in Pisces. Also up in the 9th house, which is the house of Sagittarius and Jupiter. In the 9th house, she has Neptune retrograde in Scorpio. Now, when we look at the classical ruler of Pisces, because in classical astrology, there is co-rulership. When we look at the classical ruler of Jupiter in Pisces, that's the ruler of Pisces. Why there's co-rulership is because one Jupiter rules over the nighttime, the other one rules over the daytime, one Mercury is for the daytime, one Mercury is for the nighttime, and so forth. There's perfect balance and symmetry. But in this chart, she has Pisces rising with its ruler, Jupiter in the 1st house. Now, Jupiter rules over publicity. Publicity, the newspapers making news announcements. Today, we would call it social media. Even if you brought in the modern ruler of Pisces, Neptune retrograde in Scorpio, which is death in the 9th house of Sagittarius, publicity, the news, newspapers, social media. Now, what we're seeing here is that they are both in a position where before her passing, she made statements that she was going to hold a big news conference. If you were to look at this, if you were her astrologer at the time and were to look at this lunar return chart, of course you would advise, this is not a good month. This is not a good time to hold news conferences, making big announcements. And there's a lot of speculation about what the news conference was going to be about. At the time of this lunar return chart, Marilyn Monroe was working at 20th Century Fox, and 20th Century Fox was losing tons of money because of what it was costing to make a movie called Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. So the studio was losing tons of money at the time that Marilyn Monroe was making this announcement about holding a press conference, 9th house in astrology, and both rulerships, whether you use Jupiter or Neptune, are not in good placement, because yes, Jupiter is in its home sign, but it's retrograde. Something can return on you. Now, what a lot of people are not aware of is that when Marilyn Monroe went to New York to sing Happy Birthday, Mr. President, why she was doing that, one of the reasons why she was doing that is because she was trying to drum up positive publicity for her studio. She wasn't trying to harm the studio. That's a mythology when it's written that Marilyn Monroe was kind of saying, you know, up yours, 20th Century Fox. That's not correct at all. She was trying to help out the studio and do something positive. And of course, it did bring a lot of positive publicity. She was hired back on her movie thereafter. But looking from the predictive tool of the things having to do with making announcements, not the trip to New York, holding a press conference, of course, an astrologer would say, no way. Not a good time, not a good time. Wait if you can. Now, when we look at her death, which is the 8th house, and the speculation of, did she commit suicide? That's one of the mysteries and questions. If someone is going or does commit suicide, that would be the ruler of the 1st house, them, in the 9th house. In other words, the ruler of the 1st house, Jupiter, in the 8th, going to their death, taking their own life. But that's not in this lunar return chart. I once had an astrologer say that suicide is the ruler of the 8th in the 1st. Incorrect. That would be death in whatever form. Let's say it's Mercury or something, or a car crash. That would be the ruler of the 8th in the 1st, death coming to you, your physical body. The 1st house is the body. It's what carries the soul's journey through life. So if you're looking at a plane, a train, an automobile, your physical form, the body is the 1st house. Now, in this chart, the ruler of her death, the 8th house, is ruled by Venus. which is conjunct Pluto, both in Virgo. Venus in Virgo is in its fall, and it's in the house conjunct Pluto, which is the modern ruler of Scorpio, death, transformation. But her death is conjunct Pluto, Venus and Pluto in Virgo, in the 7th house of open enemies. The 7th house, yes, is marriage, but it's also the house of open enemies, people that let you know, we don't like you. We don't like you. We're enemies. The 12th is hidden enemies. It's hiding. It's right there. You just don't see it. 12th house is like a blind spot. It is a blind spot. That's her lunar return. Not seeing what's hiding in plain sight. The death is murder. That's Pluto conjunct Venus, and Venus in its fall, not favorably placed by dignity, its fall. So this chart, and in astrology, in what's called judicial astrology, which means to discern, to judge the chart, to take out all personal opinions and biases and just look at the chart, like Lady Justice, holding up the sword of truth, the scales of justice, and she's blindfolded, meaning to just judge the chart based on what's there, not personal opinion. So this chart does say murder by an open enemy. When we go to, or let's take a look at the 5th house. Now, the 5th house has to do with lovers, romance. And what's happening there is she has the sun and Mercury in this lunar return chart. Now, Mercury is the ruler of the 7th house of open enemies. And there it is in the 5th house. Now, this Mercury is at 14 degrees Cancer, the sun sign for the United States that the founding fathers picked very deliberately because they were astrologers. If you were to look into George Washington's diary and see a copy, there are tons of notations about astrology. They were Masons. They knew about astrology. And they picked the fixed star Sirius very deliberately to be the sun sign for this United States. Now, even though there's something called the precession of the equinoxes, so certain astrologers will say, but the star really isn't there anymore because of the precession of the equinoxes. But the imprint, the signature of that fixed star is there, no matter what century we're living in. Sirius, the dog star, very important to the ancient Egyptians, because when the fixed star Sirius, the dog star of protection, benevolence, in ancient Egypt, when the Egyptians would see Sirius rising over the Nile, and it flickered like a rainbow bridge, it was a gateway, a stargate, still is, to other dimensions, then that meant life to the ancient Egyptians because it ushered in the rising of the Nile, life, agriculture. Just like the ancient astrologers, the Egyptians and other cultures, ancient Chaldea, as far as when is the weather great for life and abundance, when isn't. So isn't it interesting that the ruler of the 7th house in this lunar return chart is Mercury on that fixed star in the 5th house of a lover or lovers, plus the sun is there. Another clue, hiding in plain sight. And by the way, In ancient times, if you were an astrologer and if you didn't predict correctly to the king, the ruler, the dictator, if you didn't predict correctly, off with your head. Centuries ago, in medical astrology, doctors, and we've all heard the famous saying, any doctor practicing without the knowledge of astrology doesn't have the right to call themselves a doctor. But centuries ago, if you were a doctor and you didn't heal the patient, you didn't get paid. Why would you get paid if you didn't get the job done, if you didn't do the job done right? So in ancient astrology, today's medical profession, I could say something else, but I won't. You know the story. Anyway, in ancient times, when the king or the ruler asked the astrologer, is my country going to war? Are we going to be invaded? If the astrologers did not get that right, did not predict correctly, they were put to death. Has anything changed? Thousands of years later, have the questions changed? What's going to happen in Ukraine? Will Putin keep going? Will he be stopped? The same kind of question is being asked today, and of utmost importance. And then some. Why? We now have the capability with nuclear power to destroy this world. If you're an astrologer, you better know how to predict correctly. These conferences and conversations in recent times about, is prediction still relevant in astrology today? Are you kidding? If you're only seeing the astrology chart as a psychological chart and it's all about me, more important than ever that these questions are answered correctly. And the same kind of questions that hasn't changed for thousands of years, we're asking them today. And today, are the stakes higher? Of course. That's a rhetorical question. Of course they are. All right, so what we know in this chart as we're leading up with the lunar return up to the moment of her passing, that it clearly looks like murder, not suicide. The enemies were right there in front of her. At the very least, the astrologer would say, don't do publicity and making big announcements with what's going on here. And as far as the mob doing Marilyn Monroe in, that is incorrect mythology as well. The mob loved Marilyn Monroe because she was friends with Frank Sinatra and was repeating all the secrets of the Kennedys. So why would they want to do her in? This is a true story. Years ago in the 90s, the first apartment I moved into, there was a man in that apartment in Beverly Hills. His name was Mickey Song, S-O-N-G. And Mickey Song was a hairdresser, hairstylist that went way back into the 1950s. And he was here in Los Angeles. And he became the hairstylist for Ethel Kennedy that was married to Peter Lawford. So Mickey was included in the Kennedy group. And the first time I went to his apartment, it's a shrine. I don't know if he's still alive. I've tried to find him, but at that time, we're going back to the 90s now. His apartment was a collector's shrine to Marilyn Monroe. And he's been on Entertainment Tonight, countless interviews, all of that about Marilyn Monroe, because what happened was that he told me the story and everybody else. He told the story that he was a big fan, as everybody was, of Marilyn Monroe.
And when Marilyn Monroe was going to sing happy birthday to the president, he begged to be able to go to that event, which he did. So before Marilyn was about to go on and sing happy birthday, Mickey was allowed to kind of, when you're getting your hair and makeup, and then there's this one last look over with your makeup and your hair. And so Mickey was allowed to do that last minute look over, touch ups. And he claimed he did that little flip that she had. And so the performance happened and all of that. And Mickey went back to Los Angeles. So when he came back to Los Angeles, about a week or so later, he got a phone call. And the phone call was, Miss Monroe would like to see you. She would like you to go to her house in Brentwood. So Mickey said he's all aglow, he's all happy, he's all excited. I'm going to go, she liked me. I'm going to get to be Marilyn Monroe's hairdresser and this kind of thing. And he said, Karis, when I got to her house, she was just dead serious. And all she did was ask about what women were going into the White House, who was the president seeing. Basically, she was just grilling him about questions about women and women going in and out of the White House and that kind of thing. And Mickey, of course, didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. As my dad used to say, sometimes it's better to play Mickey the dunce. That was one of those moments. Of course, he didn't snitch on what was going on. So after that meeting was over and he was all disappointed, a couple days after that, Robert Kennedy called Mickey and said, thank you for not saying anything about the women. Her house was bugged. Years later, when a famous acting couple, I believe it was Harry Hamlin, but don't quote me, I might be wrong on that name, but when they moved into her Brentwood home and were redoing her kitchen, they found the wires. They found the tape recording wires. So she was being bugged. And this now brought it up to maybe a few weeks before her passing. But that is the story he tells. And it's been told publicly on many different news types of shows, Entertainment Tonight back in the day and such. And boy, did he have stories to tell, not just about Marilyn Monroe, but Clark Gable, Spencer Tracy. There's one about Robert Redford that I can't repeat here. It's too X-rated. But stories about classical time Hollywood. But that was a part of what was happening with Marilyn Monroe. And Mickey didn't say anything. A smart move, but that's all she wanted to know, he claims. So now we're up to, it's August 5th, 1962. The chart strongly indicates, as you can see, that it was murder, not suicide, and not an accident either. And what's interesting is that when we look at the planet Uranus, which is the sudden, the unexpected, the shock, that's on a fixed star called Regulus, Regulus, the royal heart of the lion. And that has to do with nobility and royalty and high birth and an abrupt fall or a shocking event. Interesting there. So now let's take a look at Okay. Now, Marilyn's all in the news this year, again, because of the 60th anniversary of her passing. And there will be more of a buildup as we get to August 5th. Now, I wanted to show the Lunar Return chart for the infamous Met Gala event, when a very famous beauty wore Marilyn Monroe's dress. About 20 years ago, there was a showing in Beverly Hills of Marilyn Monroe's items, and the dress was there. Stunning. Souffle gauze, the sparkles, her shoes. She was tiny, 5'5.5", 118 pounds. Anyway, for this Met Gala event, this is the Lunar Return. This is the Lunar Return for that event. Now, what's interesting here is that when we go to the 10th house, which is visible, the world, it's all out there. It's noontime. The sun is right above and shining brightly. Her lunar return puts her moon in Aquarius in the 9th house of social media and publicity, but the moon is conjunct Saturn in Aquarius. So the moon conjunct Saturn in Aquarius is very somber, not favorable publicity. It's serious. Venus and Jupiter, Venus is exalted in Pisces. Jupiter is at home in Pisces as well at 26 degrees Pisces, which is 1 degree away from the exaltation degree of Venus. So we have the two benefics, the greater and lesser benefics, the goodies, Venus and Jupiter, right there in the 10th house of fame, publicity. And the enemy, the open enemy, the 7th house in this lunar return chart is Jupiter in Pisces at that exaltation degree. So the very famous beauty, the open enemy, is in the 10th house. And the publicity, the backlash of that event will keep going and going and going. Now, why am I saying that astrologically? Because Jupiter doesn't know when to quit. It's limitless. It doesn't have boundaries. So this publicity about it keeps going and going and going. There is no limit to it. It's not one of those events like the Academy Awards this year, well, where it's like, okay, it's over with, everybody forgets about it. Venus, by the way, in astrology rules close. Venus exalted in Pisces, right there up in the 10th house. And what's in between the greater and lesser benefic? Neptune. The confusion, the deceit. Something isn't clear and above board with this event. And that would have been when the person that wore the dress was holding the white coat, the white fur, hopefully fake fur, but the white fur covering the backside, which is where all the damage took place, which is being shown now. Neptune right there, hiding what is right in between the open enemy, Jupiter, and the dress, Venus exalted in Pisces. With Marilyn's lunar return at 19 degrees in the 9th house of publicity, making that applying conjunction to Saturn, which is serious, somber. Also, the Saturn is ruling the 8th house of money, joint finances, and also inheritance. And in a lot of ways, because Marilyn is so treasured, she feels like, well, she's our treasure, she's our inheritance. And how much did they pay? I'm sure a lot of money to do this wearing of the dress at the Met Gala. The ruler of the first house for this Marilyn's lunar return, it's in the 12th house, hiding in plain sight, enemies, the blind spot, it's right there. The ruler of the fourth house, one of the terminal houses, the ending, Virgo, Mercury in the 12th. How much sorrow that I'm sure wasn't intended. I'm sure it wasn't planned, but how much sorrow that brought to people. And for someone like Marilyn, that still makes people so happy. She's as alive today. When you look at the photos of her and that smile and that energy and that light that emanates from her, a lot of those photos look like they could have been taken yesterday because of the energy that just jumps out at you. The smile that exudes joy. This was a very sorrowful event for a lot of people, that something that is irreplaceable, like Marilyn, got damaged, unnecessarily so. So let's look at now. So that's the Met Gala event. And I just wanted to show one more before I close. And if you're still with me, thanks for hanging in there. Let's see, is this the one? Yes. Okay. So this is her lunar return. And remember, your chart lives on after you. The chart keeps evolving and moving like everything in the cosmos, in the universe. And if you're into astrology, it's fun to look at famous people's charts. And also it's a really nice study tool to see how their charts, when they have peaks in their fame after their passing, when it sinks down, when it goes up again, there are all kinds of things you can see as far as how that person lives on after their passing. Now, this is the lunar return for this August 5th, 2022. And what I found incredible is that this is her lunar return. And her lunar return has Leo rising at 13 degrees, the same degree as her birth chart. What does that tell you? Yet again, the rebirth of this eternal icon. The moon, the lunar return, is in the 7th house of where it is in Aquarius in her birth chart. She was born with the moon in the 7th house. The difference, though, is that in this August 5th, 2022 lunar return, the moon is conjunct Saturn in Aquarius. So this lunar return and what marks the 60th anniversary of her passing is it's a time when we grieve at what we lost too young. And it's interesting, she had a half sister who is still alive. Bernice is still alive. I think she's up in, not North Hollywood, but she's in the Valley. She's like 98 years old. And Marilyn was just wonderful. While she was alive and her mom was in a mental institution, Marilyn sent money every week. She didn't visit her mother because it upset her mother too much. Her mother was deeply religious and disapproved and got very upset that Marilyn became an actress. But Marilyn sent money every week. She took care of her mom in her will. So after Marilyn's passing, her mom was taken care of financially for the rest of her life. And she lived to be, I think, 82. But this lunar return chart here for the event of the 60th anniversary is somber and it's quite serious. You know, Saturn is serious and it's about business, which is, I would highly doubt that it happens again, that someone takes a piece of her history, which kind of belongs to all of us, at least emotionally, and pulls a stunt like that. Now, also in this lunar return with Leo rising at the same degree as a birth chart, the sun is in the 12th house, which is sorrow, but it also indicates, again, hidden enemies right there. Hidden enemies. And the hidden enemy could be, based on the chart, Pisces on the 8th house with Jupiter there, and Neptune, modern ruler of Pisces. Those that still seek to use, exploit, and gain off of the legacy, the inheritance of Marilyn Monroe. When we go to the very top of the chart and the North Node and the planet Uranus, ruled by Venus, is up in the 10th house, there will be more shocking, unexpected things that will be coming out around this whole situation and this year. Now, the ruler of Taurus, of course, is Venus, and that is in the 11th house on a fixed star, which has to do with, of course, Venus, beauty, art, things like that, artistry, she as an artist. You know, sometimes I think that a lot of people interviewed about Marilyn Monroe that knew her, they talk about how when she was young and up and coming and making it, a lot of her co-stars and colleagues remember her as happy. She was young, she was making it fabulous. She was doing comedies and musicals and things like that. But her dream was coming true. She was making it in Hollywood. And then when she, several years later, got involved with psychiatrists and the New York intelligentsia and the Arthur Millers of the world. And they started in the Lee Strasbergs, and they started to probe into what was already a very fragile psyche. Sometimes I wonder that if she had only allowed herself to grow into herself. In other words, if you yourself have had a tough childhood, if you yourself have experienced trauma, give yourself the luxury of maturing. The hormones settle down. We become more centered, more even keel. Also, when you give yourself the scope, some distance to look back on the events that have happened to you, the trauma, the childhood, whatever it may be, then you grow into yourself. You become more grounded. And with Marilyn, gone too soon is an understatement. And what talent she would have brought out at the appropriate time. But a lot of kids like Marilyn, they're so hard on themselves, so young, to try to prove their value. So sometimes I have wondered if she had only let herself mature. She was so young. Of course, she would have grown and matured into the artist she wanted to be. But give yourself, if you relate to this, and clearly Marilyn has what's called the lost orphan child archetype. And so if you relate to this, as so many people do, they resonate with her, not just the beauty and all the energy and the smile and all of that, but the life story of not living up to your fullest potential, which is what you're here to do, and how to come out of a very difficult, painful, traumatic childhood. If this is your experience, give yourself the luxury of growing into yourself. What's the rush? There's no rush. And in a lot of ways, I just feel like she was too young for the psyche to start to be split and probed and going into the shadow and all kinds of things. By the way, if you relate to this, yoga, by the way, is one of the most effective, best things you can do to heal, because the brain doesn't mature until 25. She was becoming a star, a huge star at that age. And then even after the brain is mature, the synapses and the wires can be rewired. You can heal trauma. Yoga, by the way, there are many techniques. Yoga, by the way, is one of the best. So when we look at Marilyn, just gone too soon, and how she will live on forever, more popular in a lot of ways today than 60 years ago. It brings up a lot of things of why we love her. And I always feel like for her that so desperately wanted to prove herself as a serious artist, I always feel like her greatest masterpiece was the creation of herself. Because if nothing else, what is true here is that there's only one Marilyn. I've said this how many times? Copied, imitated, the voice, the look, all of that. No matter how many times she's imitated, and yes, there is another movie coming out about her this year that supposedly will be shocking and upset a lot of people. But no matter how many times she was imitated and copied and will continue to be so, they never quite capture the quintessence of who and what she was. You have that. It is true that there is only one you in the whole history before you, the whole future after you. There can only be one. So if you get upset when people copy, plagiarize, which people do, there's not much we can do about them, about that. Just know that when you hold on to, there's only one you, it won't bother you. They can't be you. It's impossible. They can't be her. Wear the dress. Do whatever. You can't be her. There's only one, irreplaceable, unforgettable. And great stars know this. With great stars like Marilyn, Audrey Hepburn, Cary Grant, one of a kind, unique. There's only one. Irrepeatable, irreplaceable, unforgettable. You have that. So in today's world, and I swear to God, I'm going to stop talking in a minute. In today's world where people look out in social media and they look and they copy and they imitate and they're worried about what that person's doing over there. And then one person picks something to wear and everybody else copies it and imitates. What great stars know and knew is that they were totally unique and different, and whatever was unique about them, they brought it out, they celebrated it. They put the light on it. Audrey Hepburn back in her time was told too skinny. They wanted to pad the outfits and the costumes. I saw her a couple times. She moved like a gazelle, tiny, tiny. But anyway, just remember there's only one you. If you've had trauma, you can and will heal, but give yourself the luxury of growing into yourself. Don't have to rush. And remember, like Marilyn, your greatest masterpiece is you. There is only one. And that is truth. There can't be another. Don't copy and imitate. It's always the second best anyway. Anyway, I just wanted to chat about this because of the importance of the lunar return, month-to-month predictions, the importance of prediction period in astrology. It's the heart and soul of astrology. So these questions that have been brought up, is prediction still relevant in astrology? That's a disgrace. And the Marilyn Monroe year that we're in, celebrating the 60th anniversary, and she will live on. Thank you so much for being here and listening to the Voice of Astrology podcast. My name is Karis. This is for the Lunar Returns and the fabulous, one of a kind, never to be replaced, Marilyn Monroe. Thank you, everyone. I will see you all in the stars. Thank you.